Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Everyone knows Voldemort as one of the darkest and most powerful wizards to ever exist in the world of Harry Potter, but even the films and books never revealed the full extent of his power. Today, we're going to fix that. Using materials from Pottermore and other sources, we'll pull back the curtain of mystery and uncover the truly terrifying abilities of the Dark Lord. Enjoy the journey. Number 1. The power to perform wandless magic. It may shock many, but Voldemort could wield magic without a wand, and not just minor tricks but devastating spells. Even the greatest wizards like Dumbledore and McGonagall usually relied on their wands. Voldemort, on the other hand, often used wandless and nonverbal magic in battle. A striking example is his duel with Dumbledore at the Ministry of Magic. Not only did he raise the ground beneath them without a word or a wand, he demonstrated absolute magical control. To cast unforgivable curses silently and effortlessly, that's something only a handful could ever do. He was one of them. Number 2. The ability to fly without spells. Unlike most witches and wizards who need a broom, a thestral, or at least a levitation charm, Voldemort learned to fly unaided. It defies every known law of magical physics, and only one other wizard ever matched this feat, Severus Snape. The Dark Lord used flight not only to terrify, but also as a combat strategy, escaping traps or chasing prey with inhuman speed. This was magic that had become a part of him. Number 3. Inventing spells. Voldemort didn't merely use magic, he created it. While other wizards were content with household charms, he invented some of the most powerful offensive spells, including Morsmordre, which summoned the dark mark in the sky. Creating original magic is the domain of true masters. It requires not just knowledge, but a deep understanding of the structure of magical energy itself. Voldemort became an architect of horror, designing spells with no known equals. Number 4. Master of Fire Magic. Fire was an element Voldemort shared a special bond with. In his rage, he could summon lethal waves of flame without uttering a single word. During his duel with Dumbledore, he conjured a massive serpent of fiend fire in utter silence. Such magic demands more than raw power. It requires total unity with the destructive element. And the way Voldemort wielded it raises the question, how unstable must he have been if his anger alone could set the world ablaze? Number 5. Duel Master. Few could stand against Voldemort in combat. His style was fast, precise, and unpredictable. He defeated some of the strongest witches and wizards, including Mad-Eye Moody. And let's be honest, Harry Potter survived not through skill, but due to sheer luck and a chain of coincidences. The Dark Lord could switch tactics mid-fight, as if he could foresee his opponent's next move. That's what made him so dangerous. Facing him in battle was nearly a death sentence. Number 6. Curse Master. The unforgivable curses were just the tip of the iceberg. Voldemort was a master of curses in all their forms: destructive, defensive, mind-altering, and even long-lasting enchantments. One of his most infamous acts was the curse he placed on the defense against the dark arts position at Hogwarts. No one held it for more than a year after him. He even cursed his own name, embedding a tracking spell in it so anyone who spoke it would be instantly revealed. For Voldemort, a curse wasn't just a spell, it was a means of rule and terror. Number 7. Magical Genius. But none of this would have been possible without Voldemort's greatest asset, his mind. Tom Riddle was a genius. He absorbed magical knowledge faster than anyone in Hogwarts history. Only Dumbledore rivaled him in intellect. Like Hermione, he spent hours buried in the library, but unlike her, he channeled that knowledge into empowering the dark arts. He didn't just ace exams, he turned information into raw, magical force. Number 8. Occlumency and Legilimency. Voldemort could break into your mind without lifting a wand. His Legilimency was silent, swift, and merciless. In Half-Blood Prince, Snape tells Bellatrix, The Dark Lord is most accomplished at legilimency. It wasn't just about reading thoughts. Voldemort felt emotions, fear, doubt, lies. He sniffed them out like a predator. No one could deceive him for long. Not Lucius, not Narcissa, not even Bellatrix. His eyes alone were enough to silence a room. The Death Eaters feared more than his wand. They feared that he knew. But what made him truly untouchable was his occlumency. His mind was a fortress without windows. Even Dumbledore admitted it. "I think I know why. I think I know what Voldemort may have chosen for his final safeguard," he told Harry. "But I do not know. I cannot know, because Voldemort shut me out." That level of mental control was beyond rare. It meant that even the wisest wizard of the age could only guess at his plans. Voldemort didn't just cast spells, he made his thoughts invisible. Number 9, control over magical creatures. Nagini wasn't just a pet. She was an extension of Voldemort's will. Bound to him by a deep magical connection, she slithered not as a snake, but as a part of his soul. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort used her to spy, to strike, to kill. He could see through her eyes, as he did the night she attacked Arthur Weasley. Harry, linked to Voldemort's thoughts, watched it happen. The snake reared high and struck. It wasn't a command, it was possession, control so complete it blurred the line between creature and master. But Nagini was only one of many. Voldemort rallied giants to his cause, creatures who hated wizards but bowed to his power. Hagrid mentioned how Grawp's kind had joined the Dark Lord, lured from the mountains by strength and fear. Dementors followed too, drawn by death and despair. They didn't need promises, they needed a leader who felt colder than they did. "The Dementors have deserted Azkaban," said Lupin grimly, in Order of the Phoenix. "They've gone over to Voldemort." Even the dead rose for him. In Fair Eye, soulless corpses animated by dark spells guarded the cave where he hid a Horcrux. When Harry and Dumbledore arrived, they were nearly dragged into the black water, surrounded by dead hands and white faces. Voldemort didn't just rule creatures, he used them as tools, weapons, guardians. He understood what moved them: hunger, fear, darkness. He spoke their language, and in return they served without question. Number 10. Alchemy and potion making. The potion that gave Voldemort his body back wasn't found in a book. It was crafted through obsession, ancient knowledge, and forbidden science. In Goblet of Fire, the ritual is clear: bone of the father, unknowingly given; flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed; blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. But these were only the visible ingredients. The rest was unspoken. Alchemy lost to time, magic buried in centuries of darkness. Peter Pettigrew brewed it under Voldemort's command, but he couldn't have invented it. Only the Dark Lord knew how to fuse soul, flesh, and magic into life. Even before that night, Tom Riddle had shown talent in potion making. At Hogwarts he was quiet, precise, and brilliant. Slughorn saw it. A charming boy, he called him, very gifted. But Riddle didn't stop at schoolwork. He experimented, modified instructions, created mixtures no student dared try. He understood how potions could bend life and death, slow aging, dull pain, even preserve fragments of soul in cursed objects. The diary Horcrux wasn't just a spell, it was sustained by alchemical mastery. Snape was the most skilled potion maker alive, but even he didn't know the full extent of Voldemort's brews. The resurrection potion was beyond his reach, beyond Dumbledore's. It required knowledge of dark transmutation and spiritual anchoring. Voldemort combined the physical with the metaphysical. He used ingredients with symbolic power, flesh, blood, bone, and fused them through fire. When he emerged from the cauldron, pale and reborn, he smiled. "I can touch you now," he told Harry. That moment wasn't just a return. It was proof. Voldemort had turned alchemy into resurrection. Number 11, possession and soul transfer. Voldemort didn't die in Godric's Hollow. His body was destroyed, but his soul clung to life. In Philosopher's Stone, Professor Quirrell admits it. "He is with me wherever I go," he says to Harry, trembling. But it wasn't loyalty, it was possession. Voldemort had fused himself to Quirrell's body, living like a parasite, whispering orders, feeding on unicorn blood to survive. Quirrell couldn't resist. "He is strong," he told Harry. "Stronger than you know." The back of his head became a face, a twisted mirror of evil. This was no ordinary possession. It was Voldemort's soul, disembodied, surviving by clinging to hosts like a ghost with claws. In Albania, he took over animals, rats, snakes, forest creatures, anything that breathed. But none of them lasted long. Their bodies broke under the weight of his power. It took incredible will to bind his consciousness to a living form, and even more strength to keep it from collapsing. Voldemort's control was absolute. He didn't just share a body, he devoured it from within. Few wizards even believed such magic was possible. Possession wasn't taught at Hogwarts, it wasn't written in books, it was whispered in fear. It required a soul so damaged, so unnatural, that it no longer obeyed the laws of death. Voldemort had shattered himself through Horcruxes, and those fragments gave him unnatural anchors. He could escape the grave, not just through resurrection, but through raw, terrifying invasion. Even after returning in a body of his own, he kept the skill. His mind slithered into Harry's dreams, entered his thoughts, spoke through his scar. "You will lose everything," he whispered into Harry's head in order of the Phoenix. It wasn't illusion, it was him, inside, watching. Possession wasn't just survival, it was dominance. Voldemort didn't need a spell to invade you. He was the spell. Number 12, power of persuasion and manipulation. Tom Riddle never needed a wand to control people. His words were sharper than curses. As a boy at Hogwarts, he wore a mask of politeness and brilliance. Teachers adored him. Students followed him. When he asked Slughorn about Horcruxes, he did it with a smile and a compliment. "I was in the library the other night, and I came across something rather odd," he said. "It's called a Horcrux." He played the innocent. Slughorn hesitated, then gave in. One question, one charming voice, and a forbidden secret was his. He understood people's weaknesses: pride, fear, ambition. Lucius Malfoy followed him not out of loyalty, but because Voldemort promised power. Bellatrix Lestrange worshipped him because he made her feel chosen. Even Barty Crouch Jr., a loyal ministry worker's son, fell under his spell. None of them were forced, they were seduced. Voldemort knew how to twist a mind without magic. He gave people exactly what they craved and then took everything. Dumbledore warned Harry, "Voldemort has powers the Dark Lord knows not." But he also said something else. He has a certain gift for spreading discord and enmity. That gift wasn't magical, it was psychological. When he took over the ministry, he didn't need imperious curses to make people obey. He used propaganda, fear, promises. His voice alone was enough to turn brother against brother. Even his enemies weren't immune. When he spoke to Harry in the graveyard, he didn't just attack him, he tried to shake him. "Your parents are dead," he said softly. "They died begging me for mercy." It wasn't the killing curse that hurt, it was the words. Voldemort knew how to rot a person from the inside out with nothing but sentences. That was his true spellcraft. Number 13, Self-transfiguration and Alteration of appearance. Voldemort did not simply lose his human face, he chose to shed it. His transformation into something snake-like was not a curse, but a decision. In Goblet of Fire, when he rises from the cauldron in the graveyard, the first thing Harry notices is his appearance. Whiter than a skull, with wide, livid, scarlet eyes and a nose that was as flat as a snake's. This wasn't just horror for the sake of fear, it was design. Voldemort understood that the more inhuman he looked, the more fear he could command. He crafted his body as carefully as his spells. These weren't random changes. They came after years of magical manipulation. He altered himself not just with dark rituals, but with transfiguration on a level few could survive. Dumbledore noticed it too. Lord Voldemort has always been most interested in appearances, he once told Harry. He liked control, even over how the world saw him. And he succeeded. His face was a weapon. No one who saw it could forget it. It stayed burned into memory like a scar. Even in his youth, Tom Riddle was already experimenting. In Half-Blood Prince, Slughorn tells of a charming boy with cold eyes, but behind the charm was someone who could use glamour spells, potions, and disguises to fool anyone. He tricked Hepzibah Smith by pretending to be a humble ministry worker. He walked into her home smiling and walked out with the Hufflepuff cup and Slytherin's locket, two priceless treasures, one dead woman. Voldemort mastered more than just external disguise. He studied how to become someone else, not just change form, but presence, posture, tone. He knew how to blend in or stand apart, when to appear regal, and when to seem invisible. He never needed Polyjuice Potion the way others did, but when he used it, it worked flawlessly. There was nothing accidental about his shape. Every bone, every angle of his face, every whisper of his robes was a spell, a message. He was no longer a man. He had become a symbol of terror because he made himself into one. Number 14, Horcrux creation and soul splitting. Few things in the magical world are darker than the creation of a Horcrux. It is not just a spell, it is an act of deliberate soul mutilation. Even Slughorn, a teacher well-versed in many forbidden subjects, called it the darkest of magic. When a teenage Tom Riddle asked him about it, the professor turned pale. "Merlin's beard, Tom," he gasped. "Isn't 7 the most powerfully magical number?" That one question revealed everything. Tom wasn't satisfied with one Horcrux. He planned 7, splitting his soul into 8 parts in total, with his body as the 8th. No other wizard in history had dared that. But the magic wasn't just evil, it was terrifyingly advanced. To make a Horcrux, one must commit murder, not just kill, but rip the soul apart at the exact moment of death. Then comes the enchantment, dangerous, forgotten, and hidden even from most dark wizards. Voldemort found it. He understood the nature of the soul in ways no one else did. He turned Helena Ravenclaw's stolen diadem into one Horcrux, then Hufflepuff's cup, then the ring of his grandfather, Marvel O'Gaunt. Each time, he wrapped a piece of his own essence in cursed objects tied to Hogwarts founders, symbols of power he craved as his own. These Horcruxes weren't just containers, they were alive with fragments of his hatred. Dumbledore, upon touching the ring, was nearly killed. The diary given to Lucius Malfoy opened the Chamber of Secrets and nearly murdered Ginny Weasley. Each Horcrux carried more than protection, it carried Voldemort's will. When Harry stabbed the locket with the sword of Gryffindor, it screamed. It showed him and Ron visions of their worst fears. "I have seen your heart," it hissed, "and it is mine." Voldemort's obsession with immortality shaped every part of his being. He no longer feared death, he feared vulnerability. The soul, to him, was clay, something to shape, bend, divide. His greatest magic wasn't flashy, it was silent, secret, and buried in centuries of blood and pain. But in the end, each Horcrux became his downfall. He tried to cheat death, and death, patient and quiet, waited for the day his soul would return to dust. Number 15, Magical Artifact Resonance. In the hidden folds of magical history, there exists a truth rarely spoken and never taught at Hogwarts. Lord Voldemort, born Tom Marvolo Riddle, was not merely a dark wizard of exceptional talent. He possessed an arcane ability that set him apart, even from the greatest sorcerers of his time. While others sought to control magic through force or knowledge, Voldemort forged an intimate and unnatural bond with magical artifacts themselves. These were not tools to him, they were vessels, mirrors, and ultimately extensions of his twisted self. The films of the Harry Potter saga never addressed this fully. The books hinted at it, wrapping the idea in shadows and side remarks, yet those who read closely could see the evidence scattered like Horcrux shards across the chapters. Voldemort did not just hide pieces of his soul, he changed the very fabric of the objects he touched, bending them to resonate with his essence until they were no longer what they had once been. The locket of Salazar Slytherin was the first and most telling of these transformations. It had once belonged to one of the four founders, a powerful relic with a noble lineage, but under Voldemort's influence it became something darker, more volatile. The moment it entered the world of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the locket began whispering things, twisting their thoughts, feeding on insecurities like a living parasite. This was not a natural side effect of Horcrux making. Other dark objects were dangerous, yes, but this locket seemed alive. It had a presence. Ron, usually the most grounded, found himself overtaken by jealousy and rage. "Why are you always on his side?" he had shouted before abandoning the group. The locket exploited his fear of insignificance, just as it exploited Harry's guilt and Hermione's doubt. Such precise manipulation suggests more than a cursed soul shard. It suggests an artifact that had begun to mirror its master's psyche. Then there was the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, a thing of beauty and wisdom, rumoured to enhance the intelligence of its wearer. Yet once Voldemort laid his claim on it, it turned into a silent siren of despair. Hidden in the Room of Requirement, the diadem lay dormant, but not powerless. When Harry approached it in Deathly Hallows, he described a sense of unease, a mental pressure. The closer he got, the more he felt the imprint of something watching. Not just a soul, but an identity embedded into the crown, cold, proud, obsessed with knowledge and immortality. It was as though the object had begun to think like Tom Riddle himself. The magic infused within was not just defensive, it was interpretive. It reacted to the fears and desires of those nearby, just as Voldemort once did when reading minds at Hogwarts. Even Helga Hufflepuff's cup, once a symbol of kindness and fairness, became corrupted. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore discusses the cup, he mentions how Voldemort took special pride in acquiring relics from the founders. He wanted the set, Dumbledore said. But Voldemort's choice of this cup was not about symmetry alone. He chose it because it represented everything he despised: humility, equality, nourishment. And when he corrupted it, the object itself began to radiate arrogance, cruelty, and exclusivity. Hermione's voice trembled when describing how the Horcrux tried to suffocate them with illusions inside the Gringotts vault. The cup did not sit idly. It attacked, twisting the treasure around it into suffocating waves of gold and gem, a mockery of generosity. Voldemort had not just used the cup. He had changed what it meant. Perhaps the most symbolic of all these artifacts was the one created not by founders or legends, but by death itself, the Elder Wand. This wand, crafted from elder wood and thestral tail hair, had passed through the hands of countless powerful wizards. It was said to be unbeatable but not ungoverned. The wand, like all magical cores, held preferences. It chose loyalty. It responded to mastery. But when Voldemort tried to bend it to his will, it resisted. Why? He had won it, or so he thought, by killing Snape. But the wand knew better. It did not yield to Voldemort because Voldemort did not understand the wand. He only sought to possess it. This marked the only known instance where a magical artifact rejected his resonance. A telling moment that proved Voldemort's influence worked only when he could suffuse an object with himself. The Elder Wand remained foreign to him, and thus it betrayed him in the final moment. The books never explicitly describe how Voldemort's presence altered these items, but consider this. When Harry destroys the locket in Deathly Hallows, the soul fragment inside screams. A snake, a dark heart, a mocking face, all of it lashes out in a moment of death. This is not a soul merely anchored. It is a soul infused, seeping into the object like poison into a stream. A similar phenomenon occurs when the cup is destroyed by Hermione and Ron. A scream, a horrible, drawn-out scream, left the cup as it cracked. This scream is emotional, not physical, a death cry from a consciousness. Tethered to the object's very structure, it tells us that Voldemort did not simply hide his soul. He breathed life into these things, corrupted their foundations, made them feel like extensions of his own mind. Dumbledore, in his wisdom, seemed to understand this more than he ever confessed. He once told Harry, "Lord Voldemort has seemed to grow stronger with every step he takes toward possessing the items of the Founders. Not just symbolically, but magically. These artifacts became amplifiers, nodes of resonance, each one humming with a fragment of Tom Riddle's unnatural will. What is resonance, after all, but the harmony of one vibration strengthening another? Voldemort, through sheer force of soul and intention, made these objects echo his presence until they no longer served any magical function separate from him." Number 16, suppressing other wizards' magic. In the climactic duel between Harry Potter and Voldemort in the Great Hall, sparks of green and red light filled the air like flashes of thunder and lightning. But something strange happened. Spells around Voldemort began to behave unpredictably. Defensive enchantments set by the Hogwarts professors faltered. Charms that should have protected the students shimmered and then vanished. It wasn't merely fear, the very fabric of magic seemed to twist in his presence. Voldemort didn't just fight with magic, he bent the magic around him as if his mere existence disrupted the rules everyone else followed. It was as though the world had to pause and reorient itself to him. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows during the Battle of Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall, Flitwick, and Kingsley Shacklebolt conjure protective enchantments around the castle, a shimmering dome of spells, wards, and barriers. But when Voldemort arrives, they begin to weaken. "You have kept him out for now," Professor Flitwick says, "but he will try again, and the next time the magic may not hold." That warning is not simply about brute magical force. It is an acknowledgement that Voldemort's presence doesn't just assault the walls of Hogwarts, it begins to unravel the integrity of the magic protecting it. No other wizard had that effect. Even giants, dementors, or Death Eaters combined could not breach such barriers unaided. Only Voldemort's presence made them bleed. When Dumbledore and Harry visit the cave in Half-Blood Prince, they encounter layers of dark magic, sophisticated enchantments meant to conceal and protect the locket Horcrux. Dumbledore, despite being the greatest wizard alive, speaks of Voldemort's enchantments with unease. "Voldemort is not a man to make mistakes," he says, studying the lake. "He would not rely on a spell that an average wizard could penetrate." What he doesn't say outright is that Voldemort's spells don't merely resist, they consume other magic. When Dumbledore touches the water with fire to repel the Inferi, it flickers and fades rapidly despite his power. Even he is momentarily shaken by the reaction. This isn't about clever counter-curses. It is about Voldemort's magic actively repelling the influence of other wizards. There's a chilling moment in Goblet of Fire that offers another glimpse into this disturbing ability. When Voldemort is reborn and Harry is tied to the gravestone in the graveyard, the surrounding air feels heavier. Harry notes that his wand feels wrong in his hand, foreign, reluctant, almost as if it didn't want to cast. That sensation escalates when the duel begins. The two wands connect through Priori Incantatem, but before that connection, Harry's defensive attempts are frail, scattered as if muffled. Voldemort's own curses hiss through the air with deadly purpose, while Harry's magic seems to fumble. It isn't just fear, it's magical suppression, a wave of Voldemort's dominance suffocating the wall. Spells around him. Even during the Department of Mysteries battle in Order of the Phoenix, when Voldemort appears at the very end, time itself seems to change. The magical energy in the room warps. Dumbledore hurls a jet of water at him, a solid rope of spellwork. and Voldemort vanishes through it as if it never mattered. There was a loud crack and a puff of smoke, the book says, and he was gone. The silence that follows is not relief, but disruption. The Death Eaters, scattered and defeated, are stunned not just by the loss of their leader, but by the strange, atmospheric rupture left in his wake. The magic has been drained from the air like oxygen from a flame. Perhaps the clearest testament to this unseen skill lies not in battle, but in memory. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore takes Harry through several of Tom Riddle's memories. In the orphanage, Mrs. Cole tells Dumbledore that strange things happen around young Tom. Lights flicker, doors lock, animals flee. When Dumbledore meets the boy, he notes that the room grows still. Not silent, still. The kind of stillness that doesn't suggest peace, but paralysis. The boy already exerts a kind of magical gravity. He is not a child with power. He is a child who bends power, who drains energy from everything around him and reconstitutes it to his liking. Wands, in particular, react unusually to him. Ollivander mentions in Sorcerer's Stone that Voldemort's wand did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. When Voldemort returns, Ollivander is among the first to be taken. His knowledge is not about matching wands. It is about their resistance. A wand resists certain masters, responds to others, but Voldemort's wand doesn't seem to respond. It obeys, not because it's a match, but because it has no choice. In Deathly Hallows, the Elder Wand, the most sentient and discerning wand in magical history, fails to fully reject him until Harry owns it. Until then, even this ancient relic cannot fully resist the magnetic dominance Voldemort exerts over magical objects. The Forbidden Forest encounter, when Voldemort strikes Harry with the killing curse, shows this ability in an even more symbolic way. In Deathly Hallows, the forest is filled with centaurs, enchanted creatures, and deep-rooted forest magic. But when Voldemort enters, all of it grows quiet. Even the animals don't breathe. No centaur appears. The entire forest responds as if the presence of this one being saps the life force from the woods. The spell he casts on Harry is the ultimate expression of this suppression, a killing curse powerful enough to temporarily destroy a fragment of soul clinging to a magical body, a feat so unnatural that it leaves Voldemort momentarily stunned. Number 17, Study of Ancient Magic. In the shadows of the known magical world, far from the classrooms of Hogwarts and the guidance of Dumbledore's moral compass, Tom Riddle walked a path paved not with learning, but with hunger. He was not a boy merely curious about magic. He was a seeker of forbidden truths, and while his peers practiced levitation and disarming spells, he turned his eyes toward the roots of magic, beyond the pages of the standard book of spells. While Hermione Granger considered a book with a broken spine a treasure, Tom Riddle sought those whose bindings had been ripped off and buried to ensure no wizard would ever open them again. What the films concealed, and what the books only whispered, was that Voldemort was not simply a dark wizard. He was a scholar of the unspeakable. Deep within the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, beneath enchanted chains and layers of protective spells, there were tomes that had not been touched in centuries. Most students never even knew they existed. Yet Riddle, with his intoxicating charm and perfect grades, earned the trust of the aging librarian Irma Pintz. With a forged note from Professor Slughorn and a smile that masked a predator's intent, he opened the pages of Secrets of the Darkest Art. But even that book detailing the mutilation of the soul to create Horcruxes was only the beginning. The true sources of his knowledge came from outside Hogwarts, from ruins, tombs, and the forgotten corridors of magical history. One of the most curious artifacts he encountered was the Scroll of Atumra, a fragment said to have been unearthed during the 1899 curse-breaking expedition in Giza, then lost again after a series of mysterious deaths. While the Ministry archived it as cursed beyond use, Voldemort managed to obtain copies of translated passages during his years abroad. These scrolls mentioned rites to bind breath to bone and command it past the gate of shadows. This was not simple necromancy, it was a blueprint to resist death itself. The scrolls spoke in riddles of the river that flows backward and the name that is never uttered. Voldemort, who had long abandoned his own given name, may have drawn inspiration from these ancient instructions to unmoor himself from death's domain. There is a passage in Half-Blood Prince that many readers skip too lightly. Dumbledore, speaking of Tom Riddle's descent, notes, "He disappeared for 10 years. I believe he travelled far and wide, deep into the dark arts." But where did he go? The films remain silent. The books are only marginally more generous. Yet it is in those silent spaces that Voldemort's power grew, fed by the occult knowledge of Mesopotamia, the blood rituals of Sumer, and the storm chants of the lost Druids. He did not simply learn spells, he absorbed worldviews in which magic was not a tool, but a cosmic language. From the ruins of Babylon, Voldemort studied the lost incantations once used by priest-magicians to petrify armies and summon illusions from starlight. One cursed text, the Oath of Ur-Nammu, was rumoured to drive wizards mad who read it aloud. Its script required blood to reveal its ink. Tom bled himself for this knowledge. He was no longer just a wizard. He became a vessel for magic so old it predated wand lore. In fact, in his private rituals, he often performed magic without a wand. Ancient gestures, whispered in tongues long dead, fueled the enchantments that no Hogwarts student would dare try. It is not a coincidence that his magic often defied categorization. When Harry first witnesses Voldemort's rebirth in Goblet of Fire, it is through a spell that has no known parallel, a mixture of blood, bone, and flesh, executed with a ritualistic precision unseen elsewhere in the series. This was not simply dark magic, it was ritual magic deeply rooted in archaic theology. The concept of using an enemy's blood to overcome a magical protection, Lily's sacrificial charm, is derived from ancient sacrificial traditions, many of which Voldemort likely unearthed during his exile. He didn't simply create Horcruxes, he rewrote the natural order. There is another overlooked moment during the final confrontation at Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort uses a spell against the protective charms on the castle. It is not Avada Kedavra, nor anything taught at Hogwarts. He raised the Elder Wand and, with a flourish that no one recognized, spoke words none had heard before. That flourish, wordless, unnamed, was likely derived from magical systems that existed long before Latin became the language of spellwork. Ancient Egyptian and Akkadian rituals often combined movement, sound, and material components in ways that required perfect harmony. Voldemort had perfected them. Even his serpentine affinity hints at older roots. Nagini was not just a snake, she was a maledictus, a cursed woman, and perhaps a reincarnation of an ancient guardian. Voldemort's use of her as both a companion and a Horcrux may have drawn from rituals in which serpents were revered as liminal creatures, guardians of the threshold between life and death. Ancient Hindu and Egyptian texts link serpents with immortality, transformation, and eternal return. In binding his soul to Nagini, Voldemort was tapping into symbolic systems far older than the British magical tradition. The Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows, was hidden in the Peveril ring Voldemort turned into a Horcrux. Yet he never used the stone, perhaps because he had already sought and found other, older means of contacting the dead. Ancient Roman necromancers practiced rituals in which the spirits of the dead were bound in circles of salt and silver and compelled to speak truths. Whispers from the Ministry archives suggest that Voldemort once performed such a rite in the catacombs beneath Paris, where he asked the dead to reveal the secret of incorporeal survival. Whether or not they answered is unknown, but shortly thereafter he succeeded in creating his first Horcrux. Number 18. Magical Intuition and Foreshadowing. Lord Voldemort, born Tom Marvolo Riddle, was feared for many things. His cruelty, his power, his disregard for life. But one of his greatest and least understood abilities remained hidden behind the veil of his more dramatic talents. The films never touched on it, and the books only hinted at it in scattered moments. Voldemort's uncanny magical intuition. Not divination in the traditional sense, not crystal balls or tea leaves, but a bone-deep sensitivity to danger, betrayal, magical currents, and fate itself. It was not taught in Hogwarts, not labelled in textbooks, yet it lived within him like a second mind, guiding him, warning him, pulling him toward or away from outcomes long before they took shape. From his earliest days in the orphanage, Tom Riddle displayed an unnatural sense of knowing, not just about people, but about their intentions, their fears, their lies. He could predict which child would lash out, which adult was hiding a secret, which day the headmistress would catch him stealing. This sensitivity only deepened at Hogwarts when he began experimenting with dark magic. He could feel the power in objects others overlooked, the locket, the ring, the diary. He sought out these items not through logic, but through an invisible pull, as if destiny whispered their names directly into his ear. Professor Slughorn called him brilliant. Dumbledore called him dangerous, but neither understood that Tom Riddle was moving through the world with a sense not even he fully comprehended. Voldemort did not believe in prophecy, yet he feared it. Not because he trusted the seers, but because prophecy mirrored the truth he already sensed. When Sybil Trelawney uttered her fateful prediction about the boy who would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, Voldemort acted not out of blind faith in her words, but because something in him recoiled, like a predator recognizing another on the horizon. He knew it was real because he had felt it already. He targeted Harry Potter not on impulse, but from a deep, wordless recognition that this child, above all others, would become his undoing. This same instinct revealed itself again and again during the Second Wizarding War. When Voldemort ordered the locket Horcrux to be hidden in the cave by the sea, he did not select the location randomly. He chose a place that echoed with old fear, a memory from childhood where he had once tormented 2 fellow orphans. But more than that, he felt the cave's energy, raw, primal, repelling the unworthy. He didn't use spells to test it. He didn't consult books. He stood there, in silence, and he knew. Only blood, pain, and sacrifice could guard such a treasure. The enchantments he laid were born from an intuitive understanding of what would deter the weak. It was a fortress of instinct, not intellect. Even in the presence of his most trusted followers, Voldemort's intuition never rested. His suspicion of Severus Snape simmered beneath the surface long before any evidence emerged. When Snape approached him after Dumbledore's death, offering allegiance, Voldemort accepted, but a sliver of unease began to grow. Snape was too calm, too precise, too controlled. It wasn't any specific act that betrayed him. Snape played the double agent perfectly, but Voldemort could feel a fracture beneath the surface, like a flaw in the crystal of his inner circle. He allowed Snape to live, but he watched him closely, a serpent, coiled and waiting. "I do not forgive easily," he once said. But what he did not say was that he did not doubt blindly either. This sense extended beyond people to magic itself. Voldemort could feel when something shifted in the fabric of the magical world. When the Elder Wand failed to obey him fully, he did not need Ollivander to tell him something was wrong. He sensed it the moment he cast his first spell. It did not sing for him. It obeyed, yes, but without allegiance. A dull weapon in a master's hand. His fury at this revelation was not born from ignorance, but from betrayal. Magic had never failed him before. He had always felt its rhythm, its breath, its hunger, but now, for the first time, something pushed back, and he didn't understand why. The connection with Harry Potter, forged on that night in Godric's Hollow, was more than a fluke. Voldemort felt it long before he knew it for what it was. When Harry began to see into his thoughts, into his emotions, Voldemort grew restless and unpredictable. He felt watched, violated. "The boy is in my mind again," he said with disdain, but the truth ran deeper. It wasn't just that Harry had access. Voldemort could sense Harry's presence like a splinter in his consciousness, a candle flickering in the dark corners of his soul. The films reduce this to a narrative device, a plot point, but in the books it is clear. Voldemort is not merely angry, he is haunted. He feels something he cannot control. This intuitive sensitivity explains why he moved so quickly, so ruthlessly, so often ahead of his enemies. When the Order of the Phoenix planned their decoy strategy to transport Harry safely, Voldemort was already waiting in the skies. Not because of a spy, but because he felt the tension ripple in the magical web. When Dumbledore died, Voldemort did not wait. He struck. The balance of power had shifted, and he knew it without calculation. He knew when to retreat and when to attack, when to charm and when to terrify. These decisions were not always strategic, they were instinctive. He trusted his gut over advice, his silence over discussion. Voldemort's greatest fear, ironically, was his greatest mirror. He feared prophecy not because it dictated his fate, but because it echoed what he already believed to be true. He was the chosen one of his own mythology, a man born to rule, born to conquer, born to defy death. Prophecy was an externalization of what he had felt in himself since childhood, that he was different, destined. When Trelawney's words came to him through Snape, Voldemort did not dismiss them. He hunted the child, but he also paused. He asked, which boy, which month, which parent? Not because he believed in the prophecy, but because he could feel the answer brewing in the air like a storm. This magical intuition also explains why Voldemort never feared Dumbledore in the way others expected. He respected him, avoided him, but he did not crumble before him. Dumbledore was powerful, yes, but predictable. Voldemort had met unpredictable before, in Harry, in Lily, in himself. He sensed when a soul carried chaos. Dumbledore's soul was structured, clear, deeply moral. That made him dangerous, but not mysterious. Voldemort feared mystery because he could not read it. The one thing his intuition could not pierce was love, the unselfish, uncalculated love of a mother, a friend, a protector. It baffled him because he could not feel it and therefore could not predict its power. It was this flaw, his inability to intuit love, that ultimately led to his downfall. His magical sensitivity warned him again and again that something was wrong with the boy who lived, that the Horcrux in Harry was a double-edged sword, that his connection to the boy ran deeper than mere survival. But because this connection was born of sacrifice and not ambition, Voldemort misread it. He believed in power, in control, in destiny shaped by will. Love, to him, was a weakness. So when he stood in the Forbidden Forest and aimed the Elder Wand at Harry's chest, he did not feel what Dumbledore might have felt, that the boy was ready, that Harry had already won. The scene at Malfoy Manor, when Voldemort's name is spoken aloud and he suddenly appears, shows this heightened awareness once again. The taboo placed on his name is more than a security measure. It is a magical tether woven with fear and consequence. He senses its breaking like a dog hearing a distant whistle. When the trio speaks his name, he arrives instantly, not because of logic or trap, but because he feels the magic break like glass. This ability to sense spellwork, to intuit magical anomalies, was as much a part of him as his scarred soul. In the final battle at Hogwarts, Voldemort's intuition screams at him. The room changes, the magic thickens, the walls pulse with defiance. He sees Neville rise, unbroken. He sees the students, the teachers, the parents standing firm. He senses Harry's presence before he sees him. Even the wand in his hand feels colder. Every sign points to collapse. And yet he fights, because even with all his foresight, even with all his magical senses, he is bound by his own belief in superiority. He does not question his path, even when every instinct tells him it is coming to an end. Voldemort's magical intuition was not prophecy, it was not a spell, it was not a conscious gift. It was something older, deeper, like a sixth sense, honed by fear, sharpened by ambition, and nurtured in solitude. It did not save him because he ignored its warnings when they did not align with his ego, but it shaped every major decision he made, every path he followed, and every life he destroyed. He moved through the wizarding world not like a man, but like a storm sensing the shifting winds. And even in death, that shadow of instinct lingers in the story, a reminder that the greatest threats are often those that cannot be named. Number 19. Weaponizing fear. In the shadowed halls of Hogwarts and the trembling whispers of the Ministry, there existed a force far more corrosive than any curse Voldemort could cast. It wasn't the killing curse that truly made him formidable, nor was it the Horcruxes that held the real power. The most terrifying weapon Voldemort ever wielded was invisible, intangible, and yet devastatingly real. Fear. It coursed through the magical world like poison in the bloodstream, and Voldemort understood better than anyone how to weaponize it. He transformed fear into dominion, into obedience, into silence. He didn't simply inspire terror, he fed off it. He grew stronger with every shiver, every breath held in dread, every name unspoken. From the very beginning, Tom Riddle saw that fear could break down even the strongest defenses. At Hogwarts, he learned not just how to charm and hex, but how to study people. His cold, analytical mind didn't merely absorb magic, it absorbed human behavior. He saw how Dumbledore's calm instilled strength and how Professor Slughorn's nervousness invited manipulation. Fear was a current that ran beneath the surface of every wizard and witch, and Riddle, ever the predator, learned to tap into it with surgical precision. Long before he called himself Lord Voldemort, he began practicing this dark alchemy, not turning metal into gold, but courage into despair. When he returned from his first disappearance in Goblet of Fire, his resurrection marked not just a physical return, but a psychological assault on the wizarding world. The mere announcement of his return sent shockwaves, not because he had armies, not yet, but because people remembered. They remembered the disappearances, the torture, the helplessness, and worse, they remembered their own silence during his rise. This was Voldemort's true genius, not just to frighten, but to shame. Fear that cripples is powerful, but fear that makes one feel complicit is unshakable. That's why the Ministry chose denial. It was safer, easier. Dolores Umbridge, Cornelius Fudge, Rufus Scrimgeour all chose bureaucracy over bravery, and Voldemort knew they would. The taboo on his name was not a simple superstition, it was a calculated mechanism. In Deathly Hallows we learn that speaking Voldemort itself became a magical trigger, summoning Snatchers and Death Eaters. That fear became literal, a spell, a trap, a net for the defiant. The psychological merged with the magical in a way few dark wizards ever achieved. Voldemort's understanding of fear wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. He didn't just want people to cower, he wanted fear to be embedded into their daily lives, their speech, their thoughts. He who must not be named was a brand, a curse, and a muzzle, all in one. This manipulation of fear was most evident during the infiltration of the Ministry. Thickness, under the Imperious Curse, ran a puppet government that operated with smiles and death warrants. Muggle-borns were rounded up and interrogated under false pretense. The witch Mary Cattermole stood before the Wizengamot trembling, accused not of any crime, but of existing. The court wasn't meant to administer justice, it was built to display fear. The Dementors floating above her, draining her soul, weren't just guards, they were symbols. Symbols that Voldemort had turned fear into law. Even the strongest auras, like Kingsley Shacklebolt, worked in shadows, their resistance cloaked in secrecy. This was not a battle of wands. It was psychological warfare. Even in Hogwarts, Voldemort's shadow fell heavily. In Half-Blood Prince, the school was still operating, but the tension was palpable. Students watched their backs, whispers filled corridors, and no one truly felt safe. When Katie Bell was cursed, It wasn't just an accident, it was a message, a reminder that nowhere, not even the heart of magical learning, was safe from his influence. The fear infiltrated classrooms, dinner tables, and dormitories. Professor Snape's presence became more intimidating. Draco Malfoy's transformation into a frightened would-be killer unfolded, and Dumbledore's hand, blackened by cursed magic, reminded everyone that even legends could fall. This atmosphere didn't need Death Eaters storming the gates. It was built from inside, quietly, like a spell cast in silence. Bellatrix Lestrange exemplified the fear dynamic most grotesquely. She didn't just serve Voldemort. She worshipped him, a fanatic fueled by the fear she saw in others. Her madness was contagious. At Malfoy Manor, when she tortured Hermione, it wasn't only an act of sadism, it was ritualistic terror. Ron Weasley, paralyzed by her screams, nearly lost his mind. The message was clear: resistance brings pain, not only to you, but to those you love. Voldemort didn't need to be in the room. His ideology of fear had found loyal hands to act in his name, and in that same scene we see Draco, pale and shaking, unable to even confirm Harry's identity. The fear had infected him too. The boy raised in arrogance had found that even privilege could not shield from dread. Dumbledore, always the counterweight to Voldemort's darkness, understood this manipulation perfectly. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself, he said. But even he knew that courage had limits. That is why he trusted the Order, not the Ministry. Why he relied on friendship, loyalty, and love. Because Voldemort's terror wasn't just meant to break systems, it was meant to isolate individuals. To make people feel alone. That is why the radio program Potterwatch mattered. That is why the DA's secret meetings mattered. They were acts of resistance, not against spells, but against despair. Hope was the antidote, and Voldemort was allergic to it. When Harry entered the Forbidden Forest in Deathly Hallows, ready to sacrifice himself, Voldemort believed fear had finally won. He believed he had broken the last beacon of hope. But in truth, Harry's decision wasn't made out of fear. It was made despite it. And that is what Voldemort never understood. He saw fear as power, but he never truly grasped that power rooted in fear is fragile. It can rule, but it cannot lead. It can silence, but it cannot inspire. And it certainly cannot love. Harry, choosing to walk into death without a wand raised, shattered the illusion. He revealed the one truth Voldemort could never accept, that fear, once confronted, loses its grip. Voldemort's failure at the Battle of Hogwarts was not due to flawed magic or tactical error. It was psychological. When Neville Longbottom, a boy once petrified by his very presence, stood before him with the sword of Gryffindor, something broke. Fear no longer held sway. The spell had lifted. Students, teachers, house elves, centaurs all fought, not because they believed they could win, but because they refused to be afraid. Voldemort's army faltered not because they were overpowered, but because their master's greatest weapon had dulled. The fear had faded. His most loyal followers are the Malfoys, the Lestranges, and began to splinter. Narcissa lied to him. Draco hesitated. Lucius begged. These weren't acts of loyalty, but of exhaustion, of lives eroded by fear. Voldemort could inspire devotion only through terror, but terror burns fast and leaves ruins. It does not bind, it corrodes. That was his undoing. He created an empire of the frightened, and when fear evaporated, so did his control. In the end, even his final moments were not met with awe. They were met with disbelief. Tom Riddle, Harry called him, stripping the fear from the name. Voldemort fell not as a god or a monster, but as a man who mistook fear for strength, who never understood that ruling through dread is no rule at all. His body crumbled, ordinary and empty, because in truth it always had been. And yet his legacy of fear lingered. For years, wizards still hesitated before speaking his name. Children were warned, adults spoke in euphemisms, but slowly that too began to fade, because fear, no matter how deeply rooted, can be healed. The courage of a boy who walked into the forest, the defiance of a girl tortured but unbroken, the sword held by a trembling hand. All these moments severed. The spell Voldemort cast on the world, not with magic, but with will. Voldemort's true legacy wasn't just in the deaths he caused or the ruins he left behind, but in the lesson he gave to every witch and wizard, that fear is a weapon, but only if you let it be, and once you stand against it, once you speak the name, it loses its teeth. Number 20, Alteration of magical creatures. Few have dared to investigate the darker branches of Voldemort's magical abilities, those that exist in the shadows between necromancy, transfiguration, and possession. While the films gave us Nagini as a mere serpent and the Inferi as faceless corpses, the true horror of Voldemort's magic lies in how he altered magical creatures themselves. These were not merely tools, but extensions of his will. Redesigned by ancient spells and unnatural practices. In the shadows of the Forbidden Forest, behind the quiet fear that his name evoked, Voldemort experimented with magic so obscure that even Dumbledore rarely spoke of it. It was transformation, not only of the body, but of the essence, the soul of beings already magical by nature. Nagini was never just a snake. Her appearances throughout the series, though subtle, hinted at an intelligence far beyond her species. She obeyed Voldemort with loyalty that defied any normal magical bond. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, her actions in Bathilda Bagshot's home were not just that of a trained pet, they were calculated, purposeful. When Hermione screams, "She's inside her," we realize that Nagini has become more than just a serpent. She possesses cunning, timing, and a malicious intent. Voldemort had transformed her into a living Horcrux, yes, but there was more. Her mental capabilities had evolved. That evolution cannot be explained by Horcrux magic alone. Nagini's transformation began before she became a vessel for Voldemort's soul. In the screenplay of Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, she is revealed as a maledictus, a woman cursed to eventually become a snake permanently. But what the main books hint at and what the films never explore is that Voldemort enhanced her curse. He weaponized it. Through rituals unknown to modern wizards, he extended her lifespan, strengthened her magical resistance, and bound her to his will. There was a snake, huge snake, and she was guarding the place like she understood everything, said Ron in The Deathly Hallows as they recalled the encounter at Godric's Hollow. That understanding was no accident. These spells, whispers from the past, were not in the curriculum of Hogwarts. They belonged to the ancient branches of magic, practiced in darker continents, older times. Voldemort, during his years of disappearance after his defeat by baby Harry, did not simply wander. He hunted, he explored ruins, spoke to spirits, and sacrificed what little humanity he had left to acquire knowledge that most would burn rather than read. And in that knowledge he found the means to change magical creatures, not through simple transfiguration, but through soul manipulation. Inferi are often dismissed as magical zombies. Even Dumbledore described them plainly. Dead bodies reanimated by dark magic used as instruments by the Dark Lord or other dark wizards, but Voldemort's Inferi moved with coordination. When Harry encountered them in the cave, they responded not to random motion, but to intent. They grabbed, they dragged, they swarmed in silence like a single mind acting through multiple bodies. This unity pointed to something deeper than just animation. Voldemort did not raise them to walk, he restructured their magical fabric. They were bound to him like golems, formed not of clay, but corrupted flesh and memory. This level of control required sacrifice, and Voldemort, devoid of empathy, paid the price in the only currency he valued: power. Each Inferius was said to be created not merely by reviving a body, but by destroying a soul's remnants, anchoring dark energy in its place. A spell of this nature would have been too dangerous to perform en masse, yet Voldemort did it, hundreds of Inferi in the lake. Their eyes glowed faintly. Their touch was cold but coordinated. Harry nearly drowned in that lake, not because the Inferi were strong, but because they were many and bound by a singular directive: protect the locket. Only one other time does the series hint at such mastery, in the graveyard, when Voldemort returns. He does not simply summon a new body. He uses bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. The spell is more than resurrection. It is a fusion of essence and power, a prototype for the work he would later use on creatures. If Voldemort could recreate himself through components of others, what stopped him from reassembling a creature's identity? Nagini, the Inferi, even the Basilisk, none of them were simple monsters. They were blueprints for his vision of magical evolution. We must also consider the basilisk bred from a chicken egg hatched beneath a toad, but raised by Tom Riddle's will. From the moment it slithered through Hogwarts, it responded to his commands, hidden in the walls for decades. The Chamber of Secrets was its lair, but the basilisk did not age. Decades passed, and yet its power remained untouched. Was this simply the nature of the beast, or had Tom Riddle, even as a student, already begun experimenting? In Parseltongue, a command is enough to control a snake, but to preserve and weaponize it for decades, that requires manipulation of time and life, both dark, both ancient. In Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore explores the cave, he says, "This potion might paralyze me, might make me forget, might cause me so much pain, I beg for relief. You are not to stop. The Inferi, the potion, the structure, all are part of Voldemort's design. He did not trust even spells to keep his secrets. He embedded protective life forms altered for defense. This is not just dark magic, this is customized biological warfare, creatures twisted into new shapes, set with behaviors that required no training, only dark intention." Even Nagini's death reveals how unnatural she had become. When Neville cuts off her head with the sword of Gryffindor, the act is not just execution, it is exorcism. A normal snake would have died with a simple spell, but the sword, imbued with basilisk venom, was needed to undo her protection. This tells us that her magical resistance was no longer natural. Something in her was bound with protections typically seen in Horcruxes or enchanted artifacts. She was no longer a being of flesh alone. It is worth asking how many other creatures did Voldemort change that we never saw. The acromantulas of the Forbidden Forest grew restless during the final battle. They descended from the woods not because they were allies of the Death Eaters, but because something called them. Could Voldemort's influence have stretched to their minds as well? Aragog, their leader, had died by then, and the new brood seemed erratic, more violent, less bound to Hagrid's past kindness. These were not random acts of violence, they were chaos driven by an invisible will. Voldemort believed in domination through fear, but more than that, through transformation. He feared death above all else, and so he reshaped the world to mimic his defiance of nature. Creatures that should have lived and died according to their own laws became his extensions. He remade the magical world in his own image, not through politics, not through brute force, but through a systematic rewriting of what life meant. Magic, to him, was not a gift. It was a tool to twist the living into mirrors of his own broken soul. Many suspect that Voldemort's transformations left marks on the magical fabric of Britain. Even after his death, the Forbidden Forest grew darker. The waters near the cave were avoided. Some believed that traces of his experiments remained embedded in the earth itself. The Ministry, after the war, classified several new magical anomalies, creatures mutated beyond known categories. Though never confirmed, many whispered that these were remnants of his altered Inferi or failed serpent hybrids, forgotten in the rush of war. And what of the centaurs who retreated deeper into the forest as Voldemort's power rose? These proud, magical beings sensed changes in the magical balance. Ferenzi warned of dark alignments in the stars, and while he spoke in riddles, his fear was clear. The creatures of the forest were being altered, some subtly, some irreversibly. Even Grawp, Hagrid's giant brother, became more docile in the last year. Was it Hagrid's influence alone, or had Voldemort's manipulations extended even to giants and their kin? In the end, Voldemort's greatest power may not have been the killing curse or his ability to split his soul. It was his willingness to reshape the very nature of life itself. Magic in his hands was a sculptor's knife. Nagini was not just a snake. The Inferi were not just corpses. They were warnings. They were messages written in flesh, in blood, in ancient spells that no one should ever cast again. Number 21. Soul-based immortality research. There are few things more feared in the wizarding world than the chill of death. And among the many witches and wizards who whispered of ways to delay its touch, none reached deeper into the abyss than Tom Marvolo Riddle. Where others sought potions or enchantments to extend their years, he dissected the concept of mortality itself, not with scalpels, but with ancient runes and forbidden rituals. He did not want to delay death. He wanted to disarm it, conquer it, and then rebuild the very laws that governed the soul. Voldemort's descent into the underworld of magical knowledge wasn't a pursuit of eternal youth or glory. It was a cold, intellectual war against death, waged not with bravery, but with a terrifying obsession. And though the films touch the surface of his evil, and even the books only hint at the true scope of his spiritual mutilations, the reality is far more haunting. Voldemort did not merely defy death, he twisted the very idea of what it meant to live. While most of the magical community was content to accept the soul as an invisible constant, something that simply was, Voldemort asked questions that frightened even the most learned minds. What is a soul made of? Where does it begin? How does it end? Is it singular? Or can it be divided like bread? And if so, how many times before the loaf is no longer a meal, but crumbs? He sought answers not in philosophy, but in practice. The act of creating a Horcrux, already considered the darkest of magical acts, was merely his first incision. When he murdered Myrtle Warren to create the first Horcrux within Tom Riddle's diary, it was not done for necessity, but for experimentation. How far can I go? Was the question echoing through every spell he cast. Each life he took was not only a step toward immortality, but a tool to measure the limits of the soul. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore explains, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." But for Voldemort, the unknown was a problem to be solved, not feared. Unlike Nicholas Flamel, whose pursuit of immortality was alchemical and external, Voldemort's path was internal. He didn't want to hide from death inside a philosopher's stone. He wanted to hollow himself out and store pieces of his essence, like cursed seeds across time and space. His Horcruxes, Tom Riddle's diary, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, Nagini and Harry himself were less like anchors and more like surgical containers. Each was proof of a theory that the soul could be fractured, stored, and manipulated with precision. And yet even this was not the end of his experiments. The mutilation of the soul was not a side effect of murder, but a calculated incision. In the Tales of Beedle the Bard, the story of the three brothers hints at a different path: the resurrection stone, the Elder Wand, the invisibility cloak. But Voldemort ignored such symbolism. To him, relics were tools, not teachings. He took the Elder Wand not for its meaning, but for its power. He ignored the stone's purpose and used it as a Horcrux. And he shunned the cloak entirely, seeing hiding as weakness. The moral lessons of death and acceptance were lost on him. He wanted to own death, not understand it. The clearest evidence of Voldemort's metaphysical failure appears in Deathly Hallows, in the limbo-like realm of King's Cross. When Harry sees the small, naked child writhing under a bench, burned, bleeding, and beyond healing, it is not just a manifestation of Voldemort's damage. It is Voldemort himself, or rather, what remains of his soul. As Dumbledore tells Harry, he is beyond our help. The creature is not in pain because it is dying, but because it cannot die. It has been torn and scattered too many times. Death no longer recognizes it. The soul fragment is stuck in perpetual liminality, too broken to heal, too unnatural to pass on. It is here, in this grotesque moment, that we see the ultimate cost of Voldemort's philosophy. He has achieved his goal. He has made himself incompatible with death, but it has not made him stronger. It has made him monstrous. His soul is no longer whole, no longer human, no longer even magical in the traditional sense. It is spiritual debris. Voldemort may have feared death as a kind of dissolution, but what he created was far worse: endless disintegration without end. The limp, shriveled horror beneath the station bench is not the price of his crimes. It is the prize he won for them. Voldemort's understanding of the soul went further than anyone else's. He understood that the soul was not just a metaphysical concept, it was an engine. And he tried to rewire it. He fed it with violence, split it with murder, and protected it with curses so ancient that even the Hogwarts founders whispered about them. He stored it in relics that resonated with personal meaning, amplifying the magical signature of each fragment. But this wasn't sentimentality, it was strategic resonance. A piece of his soul inside Helga Hufflepuff's cup, for example, would absorb not just the magic of the artifact, but the echo of generations who revered it. Voldemort wasn't hiding his soul, he was feeding it, fortifying it, building a network of spiritual fortresses. He may have even experimented with consciousness itself. Consider his return in Goblet of Fire. He exists bodiless as less than the meanest ghost, yet retains agency, memory, and intention. He's not a ghost, not a shade. He's a free-floating shred of soul without a host, and yet he can possess animals, influence dreams, and gather followers. This hints at another level of his experimentation, displacement of self, not just division. A soul fragment by its nature is supposed to be inert, yet Voldemort's soul continues to think, to speak, to hate. This suggests that he didn't just divide himself, he copied himself. There may have been more than one Voldemort thinking independently. The implications of this are terrifying. He may have created psychic redundancies like magical backups in case of total collapse. Even his name reflects this obsession. Voldemort is derived from French, Voldemort, meaning flight from death. But his flight was not a sprint. It was a slow, methodical unraveling of the human condition. Every Horcrux was a rejection of the natural order, a middle finger to the universe. In creating them, he did not ask for forgiveness or favor from the magical world. He simply declared war on its most ancient truth, that life ends. His victory, if one can call it that, was the grotesque survival of a soul too damaged to dissolve. And yet, the soul cannot be cheated indefinitely. His magic, like a parasite, consumed itself. His final death was not caused by a spell or a sword, but by the collapse of his own design. With each Horcrux destroyed, a part of his identity withered. By the time he faced Harry in the Great Hall, he was not a man, not even a being. He was an echo desperately trying to resonate. When he died, he left no ghost, no remnant, no mark. There was no magical residue. The room did not darken, the world did not shiver. He was simply gone. And that silence was perhaps the greatest punishment of all. He believed death was the ultimate failure, but in truth it was his lack of acceptance that condemned him. Harry, by contrast, accepts death. He walks into the forest unarmed, ready to die for love. That act alone restores the soul Voldemort had tried to destroy within him. Love, the magic Voldemort dismissed as childish, becomes the very thread that binds the soul. In this, the books whisper their truest lesson, that to fear death is human, but to mutilate the soul in order to avoid it is monstrous. Voldemort is not a villain because he murdered. He is not even a villain because he sought power. He is a villain because he believed the soul was a thing to be owned. He believed it could be bent, ripped, fed, and forced into obedience. He treated the sacred as functional. He approached eternity like a thief, breaking into a place that was never his, and in doing so he became the most cursed thing of all, not dead, not living, but discarded by both. His burned, pitiful corpse at King's Cross is more than a metaphor. It is evidence, evidence that some crimes leave wounds too deep for even magic to heal, evidence that a soul, once broken for selfish gain, can become a prison rather than a promise, and most of all, evidence that immortality without morality is not salvation, it is damnation. Number 22. Breaking magical protections. Lord Voldemort's legend is often told through the prism of fear, power, and unspeakable evil. Yet behind the terrifying image of the Dark Lord lies something far more methodical, an extraordinary mind that unraveled the deepest mechanisms of magic. While the books and films touch on his destructive capabilities, one of Voldemort's most underexplored talents remains his exceptional gift for dismantling magical protections. It was not brute force that enabled him to bypass wards and spells that had stood unbroken for centuries. It was genius. In the silence between battles and curses, he was a magician who saw barriers not as hindrances, but as invitations to solve a puzzle. There may never have been a wizard more gifted at breaking through enchantments, and the consequences of this talent shaped the fate of the magical world. The very fact that Voldemort found the Potters on that fateful Halloween night in 1881 is evidence of his terrifying skill. Their house in Godric's Hollow had been hidden under the Fidelius charm, one of the most potent forms of magical concealment known. The spell required a secret keeper to safeguard the location, and in theory, only someone to whom the secret was directly told could ever access the hidden place. The spell wasn't flawed, the human heart was. Voldemort didn't destroy the Fidelius by force. He manipulated the fragile loyalties of Peter Pettigrew and made the protections irrelevant. This is the essence of Voldemort's mastery, understanding that magic, no matter how ancient or elaborate, always has a crack, be it in the spell itself or in the soul of its caster. He didn't need to destroy the shield when he could find the key. But there were times when Voldemort didn't rely on betrayal. The cave in which he hid one of his Horcruxes is perhaps the most intricate magical fortress we see in the books. Ancient magic protected the entrance, demanding blood sacrifice to open a hidden door in the rock. The lake was filled with inferi, animated corpses lying in wait beneath the surface. The potion in the basin caused hallucinations and agony, and the Horcrux itself was a fake, meant to lure any intruder into a fatal trap. Yet Voldemort entered this cave himself more than once without incident. This means he knew the exact mechanics of every layer of protection. He constructed it all, yes, but he could also move through it fluidly, as if these layers bent to his will. Dumbledore himself, one of the most brilliant minds in magical history, struggled through each barrier. Voldemort, by contrast, seemed to glide past them like a shadow. Even Hogwarts, the oldest and most magically protected school in the wizarding world, eventually fell to him. Its founders had layered the grounds with centuries of protective enchantments, and Albus Dumbledore had reinforced them during his tenure. Yet Voldemort's forces breached the castle not once but twice. The first was subtle, through Draco Malfoy's clever use of the Vanishing Cabinet, but make no mistake, Voldemort allowed this plan. He saw through the walls of the school not with his eyes, but with intuition and dark understanding. The final assault during the Battle of Hogwarts was even more revealing. Though the defenders conjured powerful protections, including shields, enchantments, and magical barriers, these could only delay the inevitable. The enchantments protecting Hogwarts have broken, McGonagall says grimly, in the Deathly Hallows. Voldemort's forces didn't break through with numbers alone. They did so with him, standing just outside, projecting power that rippled through the air like heat. His ability wasn't limited to large places. Voldemort could violate the sanctity of a mind as easily as he could walk through a ward. Occlumency and Legilimency are complex magical disciplines. Most struggle for years to master even the basics, but Voldemort pierced into thoughts and memories like a knife through fabric. The Dark Lord is a powerful Legilimens, Snape once warned. He was beyond reading minds, he tore them open. His connection to Harry, forged through the Horcrux, gave him direct access to visions, feelings, and even places Harry had never seen. Dumbledore took enormous care to shield Harry's mind, but Voldemort's intrusions proved relentless. This wasn't just Legilimency, it was domination, a magical violation on a level that suggested his power to breach mental defenses was as precise and inevitable as death itself. The Ministry of Magic, too, crumbled before his invisible hand. Though its walls were reinforced with powerful protections and centuries of bureaucracy, Voldemort infiltrated it without a public war. By the time the public realized the Ministry had fallen, the Dark Lord had already installed Pious Thickness, a puppet controlled by the Imperious Curse, and begun altering laws from within. "The Ministry has fallen," Kingsley Shacklebolt announced grimly. No explosions, no siege, just the quiet shattering of every magical safeguard through manipulation, understanding, and a ruthless knowledge of how enchantments intersect with human systems. The Ministry was a fortress of tradition and illusion, but Voldemort's magic slipped past its defenses like smoke through a keyhole. We cannot forget how he violated the protection of Harry's own blood. When Lily Potter sacrificed herself for her son, she left behind a magical bond that tethered Harry to life through love, a magic Voldemort never understood. Yet even this was not immune to his reach. In the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort used Harry's own blood to resurrect himself, binding Harry's protection into his own body. "He took your blood, believing it would strengthen him," Dumbledore said. "He tethered you to life while he lives." This was more than dark ritual. It was proof that Voldemort could identify the structure of enchantments meant to protect and turn them against their caster. Love itself, the most potent shield, became another layer in his armor. Perhaps the clearest illustration of his brilliance lies in how he created the enchantments that protected his Horcruxes. Each one was hidden behind a defense so specific, so diabolically designed, that it required not just power, but deep magical insight to bypass. The diadem in the Room of Requirement was lost to time, cloaked in the magic of forgotten need. The locket in the cave was locked behind deception. The cup of Hufflepuff rested in Bellatrix's vault, protected by duplicating curses, burning treasures, and Gringotts' own formidable wards. Every one of these sites stood as a test, and each one was his answer to the world's assumption that anything could remain untouched forever. No spell was unbreakable, no ward eternal. Voldemort's understanding of protections also extended to magical objects. He uncovered the Elder Wand's history and lineage not just through brute force, but through its inherent magical logic. The wand refused him even after he took it from Dumbledore's tomb, a detail that enraged him. Yet he deduced that it obeyed not possession, but conquest. The wand, the most powerful wand ever made, it would not kill its true master, he hissed moments before his downfall. Even in this, Voldemort's thoughts worked through layers of magical resistance and inheritance, always searching for the deeper rule beneath the obvious one. When he killed Hepzibah Smith to steal Hufflepuff's cup, he bypassed her protections with a smoothness that went unnoticed until it was too late. He infiltrated her trust, her home, and eventually her vaults. He wasn't just a murderer, he was a strategist. Each assassination, each theft of a treasured artifact involved peeling back layers of charm, loyalty, and security. He knew how protective spells formed around emotion, and he used that against his victims. There is little doubt that Voldemort saw magic as a structure to be reverse-engineered. What others feared, he studied. What others cast, he broke. Even the protective spells around Grimmauld Place, another house hidden by the Fidelius charm, became vulnerable once Dumbledore died. Voldemort didn't rush in. He waited, he observed, then, once the conditions aligned, he sent Death Eaters to scour it. When Yaxley infiltrated the Ministry and tracked the trio's apparitions, it was another example of Voldemort turning protection into exposure. Every spell cast to keep Harry and his allies hidden became a trail he could follow because he understood how those spells breathed, changed, and decayed over time. The truth is, Voldemort didn't see magic as light or dark, defensive or offensive. He saw it as structure. He recognized that protections were not divine decrees, they were constructions. And all constructions, even the most intricate, bear fault lines. This is what made him so dangerous, not just his cruelty, but his clarity. In a world filled with illusion and belief, Voldemort dealt only in understanding. And understanding in the hands of a man with no soul becomes the deadliest weapon of all. Number 23, consciousness fragmentation. In the shadowed corridors of magical history, there are spells so obscure and abilities so terrifying that even the darkest wizards hesitate to pursue them. Yet Tom Marvolo Riddle, who named himself Lord Voldemort, did not hesitate. What set him apart from all others was not just the creation of Horcruxes, but the grim and more complex art that accompanied them, an unspoken, eerie talent for separating not merely his soul, but his consciousness. It was a form of metaphysical dismemberment, allowing him to cast fragments of awareness into objects, creatures, and even people, cultivating echoes of himself like poisonous seeds across the wizarding world. This wasn't just about soul magic. The splitting of the soul, as Hermione Granger so carefully explained, was an abomination. The fragment of soul inside it depends on its container for survival. It can't think or act by itself. It's not a copy of the person, it's just a piece of him. Yet what Voldemort achieved contradicted this. The diary of Tom Riddle wasn't a dormant splinter, it was a self-aware, intelligent, reactive shade of Voldemort, capable of charming, manipulating, and possessing a human being. "He poured a bit of his soul into it," Dumbledore said, "but it acted like a memory brought to life, thinking, planning." That wasn't mere soul division, it was the division of mind, of identity. When Ginny Weasley clutched that diary, she wasn't merely under a curse, she was speaking with Tom Riddle himself. He responded to her, learned from her, and gradually replaced her thoughts with his own. He became strong enough to control her body, forcing her to open the Chamber of Secrets. This wasn't passive possession, it was active mental presence, and more than that, the memory of Tom Riddle grew stronger the more Ginny weakened. It was as if consciousness itself had found a way to inhabit parchment and ink. This pattern wasn't isolated to the diary. When Voldemort fled from the failed killing curse in 1981, he didn't just become a shadow of a soul. He survived in vapor-like form but still retained a flicker of self-awareness. Quirinus Quirrell, the timid defense against the dark arts professor, became host to that flicker. Though the film merely showed Voldemort's face at the back of Quirrell's head, the books made it clearer. Voldemort's presence could speak, command, and direct actions. The man's entire will was overridden by the parasite he carried. Not only did Voldemort occupy the professor's body, he communicated, strategized, and fed on unicorn blood to preserve this half-life. It was an existence held together not by physical means, but by a mind too fractured to die. No one else in magical history is recorded to have possessed such ability. Possession is an understood dark art. Animagi and metamorph magi shift their own forms. Legilimency invades thoughts. But what Voldemort accomplished was different. He replicated his own conscious patterns across magical interfaces. When Harry Potter began to feel what Voldemort felt, visions of corridors, snakes, emotions, it wasn't just a soul connection. It was the leaking of perception, of awareness between two vessels. Dumbledore feared this deeply. "Something much worse has happened, something you must guard against. He can now use you, Harry." A mind stretched too far had started to bleed. This consciousness, once fractured, behaved like radiation. Even after Voldemort's physical return in the graveyard, the mental tether to Harry remained. Harry's dreams became windows into Voldemort's emotions: joy, rage, triumph. In Order of the Phoenix, when Arthur Weasley was attacked, Harry saw it happen through Nagini's eyes. That was no mere vision. He was the snake. "I was the snake," he said. "I saw it all, as if I was inside her, looking through her eyes." This implies a depth of connection where Voldemort's consciousness had latched onto both Nagini and Harry simultaneously. Multiple minds, one fragmented will. Nagini's case is especially haunting. As Dumbledore later revealed, the Great Snake was a Horcrux, but beyond that she was inhabited. Voldemort could act through her, speak through her, think through her. In Deathly Hallows he lay in the dark, Harry, and yet simultaneously was seen commanding his army, giving orders, and obsessing over the Elder Wand. There was never a moment when he was not thinking, even when weakened. Each Horcrux was not just a hiding place, it was a node in a vast network of consciousness. This web of awareness meant that Voldemort in his later years was never truly alone. Each object that held a Horcrux also held some essence of thought. The locket, when worn by Ron Weasley, whispered to him, showing him terrible visions. "Least loved always by the mother who craved a daughter. Least loved now by the girl who prefers your friend." These were not mechanical enchantments. They were targeted, psychological attacks. That locket knew what to say. It adapted. It had a mind, not a soul, but a sharp-edged splinter of perception. What allowed Voldemort to achieve this goes beyond known magic. The Elder Wand, a relic of fabled power, granted immense spellcasting prowess, yet even that could not enable such a feat. Gellert Grindelwald, who possessed the wand before Dumbledore, never developed such talents. This art required not only dark knowledge, but monstrous willpower, the ability to fragment identity without losing it entirely. Most who split their souls go mad, their consciousness dissolving like sugar in water. Voldemort preserved cohesion. He didn't simply hide, he multiplied. Even the cursed diadem of Ravenclaw bore this eerie echo. When Harry entered the Room of Requirement and approached the Horcrux, it emanated a chill, not just from dark magic, but from a presence that recognized him. It shrieked in pain when destroyed. The cup of Hufflepuff kept in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault reacted with fury and desperation, splashing boiling water in every direction. These weren't passive objects. They resisted destruction. They felt it coming. The result of such fragmentation was that Voldemort's sense of I no longer resided in one place. This gave him immense strategic advantages. Even when one Horcrux was destroyed, he did not falter immediately, but it also caused vulnerability. He could be in too many places at once, spread too thin. The attack on the Department of Mysteries, for instance, may have failed because Voldemort underestimated the emotional echo traveling back through Harry. He didn't just possess Harry's vision, he was affected by Harry's love, compassion, and pain. The connection became a double-edged wand. Dumbledore knew this and tried to teach Harry occlumency, not just to shield his thoughts, but to shield Voldemort's. The Dark Lord is highly skilled at legilimency. He can read minds, Snape warned, but what he didn't say is that Voldemort didn't need to read, he was already inside. It was a two-way current, unnatural and unstable. Harry's dreams weren't just surveillance, they were visits. And with every visit, Voldemort risked contamination by the very emotions he abhorred. The apex of this horrifying talent unfolded in the Forbidden Forest. When Harry approached Voldemort to sacrifice himself, he wasn't just dying for his friends, he was letting the piece of Voldemort's soul inside him die. But that death wasn't clean. In the King's Cross-like limbo, Harry saw the infant-like creature writhing beneath a bench. It was Voldemort, not a soul fragment, but a conscious echo. dying, broken, but aware. That awareness survived death, screaming in the void. The films often suggest Voldemort's downfall was caused by arrogance, love, or prophecy. But this deeper truth lies buried in the subtext of the books. Voldemort built a mind too vast, too scattered, to ever fully control. In the end, he lost not just his life, but the consistency of self. Each fragment, snake, cup, diary, ring, became its own ghost, and together they pulled him apart from the inside. This is why, when the final duel occurred in the Great Hall, the death of Voldemort was not just physical. His body crumbled, yes, but the scream he let out was more than pain. It was the sound of a network collapsing. Every shard of thought, every displaced echo of will finally crashed into silence. He had dared to break the laws not of magic, but of identity itself. He didn't just lose the war, he lost himself. Number 24, harnessing the magic of locations. In the shadows of Voldemort's legacy lies a talent few have dared to name. While the films gave us a villain obsessed with power, and the books detailed his mastery of dark arts, neither fully captured one of his most profound magical skills: his instinctual, perhaps even arcane, ability to manipulate the very soul of a place. Unlike other dark wizards who sought dominance through brute spells and curses, Voldemort understood that power did not merely come from within a wand, but could be drawn from the land beneath one's feet. He was not just a wielder of magic, he was a sculptor of its environment. And while the term geomancy is never spoken in the canon, the implications of his behavior make it undeniably clear. Voldemort could feel the veins of power beneath the surface of the world, and he knew how to bind them to his will. One of the earliest and most haunting examples of this skill is the seaside cave where he hid one of his Horcruxes. It wasn't simply a hidden location. The place was pulsing with ancient magic, saturated with dread. When Dumbledore and Harry entered the cave in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the headmaster immediately remarked, "This place is very dark, very powerful. I can feel something here, something ancient and deeply rooted." The cave was alive, not in a literal sense, but with a kind of sentience crafted from layered enchantments and drawn from the raw, natural magic that had long slept in its stone and sea. Voldemort chose that cave not because it was remote, but because it already resonated with a primal energy he could awaken. This is where Voldemort's particular genius reveals itself. The enchantments within the cave, the blood price at the entrance, the inferi-infested lake, the cursed potion, were all formidable. But they were not simply placed into a space. They were fused with it. The cave itself became a crucible of magic. Voldemort had amplified what was already there, bending the atmosphere to carry his will. It was more than setting a trap. It was transforming a location into an extension of his own soul. That cave was not only a hiding place, it was a weapon and a message. The very walls seemed to whisper that this was a place for monsters. The same pattern repeats in Albania, where he fled after his first fall. Most wizards would have gone to ground in populated cities or magical enclaves, hiding among the living. But Voldemort returned to a forested wasteland steeped in forgotten blood. There, in the ruins of an ancient tomb, he found shelter not only for his mutilated form, but for his darkest magic. The fact that he survived as a fragment of soul for so long in that place suggests it offered more than isolation. The tomb, likely tied to the remains of a long-dead dark sorcerer or ancient chieftain, carried residual power, the kind only a few could sense and even fewer could harness. Voldemort's choice wasn't driven by fear, it was a deliberate return to the roots of something older and darker than most dared to consider. These decisions echo a pattern of magical site selection that aligns with the forgotten discipline of geomagic, the study of how magical energy flows through the land like invisible rivers. Wizards of antiquity believed certain places acted like wells of power, and that these nodes, called nexuses, could be awakened, strengthened, and weaponized. Though the field fell into obscurity, likely because of its unquantifiable nature and the danger it posed in the wrong hands, Voldemort seemed to resurrect it. He didn't just understand it, he relied on it. Consider Malfoy Manor during the Second Wizarding War. Once a place of aristocratic grandeur, it became the Dark Lord's headquarters, a fortress as symbolic as it was practical. Lucius Malfoy, stripped of pride and power, watched helplessly as his ancestral home was twisted into a sanctum of terror. But this was not just strategy or humiliation. The manor, with its long corridors, stone vaults, and underground cells, was likely built centuries earlier on a site of strong magical convergence. Old pureblood families often did this, even if they no longer understood why. Voldemort sensed this. He turned the house into a node of dark energy, and it responded. Hermione later described the place as suffocating, as though the very air was watching. The house had changed. It had been tuned, like an instrument, to play the chords of fear. And of course, the most significant of these locations is Hogwarts itself. Tom Riddle had always been drawn to the castle, not just because it was his first true home, but because it sat atop a confluence of magical forces more powerful than anywhere else in Britain. From the lake to the Forbidden Forest, the castle was surrounded by wild, unshaped energy, barely harnessed by the founders. Even within the castle, strange places like the Room of Requirement and the Chamber of Secrets hinted at buried mysteries. It's no coincidence that two Horcruxes were hidden within Hogwarts, the diadem of Ravenclaw placed in the very heart of the castle's magic, and the diary which had already been used to access the chamber. Itself a sacred ancient node of raw serpentine power. When Voldemort placed pieces of his soul here, he wasn't just hiding them, he was anchoring them in a place that could feed them. This manipulation of place was not only practical, it was psychological. Voldemort seemed to understand that magic wasn't just about spells and wands, but about atmosphere and suggestion. When Harry returned to the cave with Dumbledore, the very presence of the place weakened them. When they entered Malfoy Manor, fear clouded their judgment. When they explored the Chamber of Secrets, the oppressive silence worked on their nerves. Voldemort used the place itself as a spell, casting enchantments not just on the walls but on the minds of those who entered. Such knowledge is absent from textbooks. Even in the Tales of Beedle the Bard, magic is described as a force of intent and emotion, not environment. And yet in the Deathly Hallows, when Ron, Hermione, and Harry camp in different parts of the countryside, Hermione mentions how some areas feel wrong. It is not merely danger they sense, it's distortion. It's the kind of psychic pressure that a geomancer would recognize as a place where magic has been bent out of its natural flow. These warps, Voldemort's footprints, remain even after he is gone. To understand Voldemort fully, one must also understand that he was not merely powerful. He was attuned. He did not conquer places, he merged with them. This is perhaps why his final failure at Hogwarts was so poetic. He had attempted to bend even the most sacred magical nexus to his will, but Hogwarts had always resisted him. It expelled him as a boy. It watched as his diary was destroyed, and in the end it stood witness as he was defeated in its great hall, the stone beneath his body humming with the power he could never fully own. In some twisted way, Voldemort saw himself as a creature of myth, like the Dark Lords of old, those who once ruled from places where the world's magic throbbed like a living thing. His knowledge of these ancient arts was not taught. He found it, perhaps in the books hidden in the restricted section, or perhaps it was whispered to him by the remnants of spirits that lingered in those places where death had passed too often. His affinity for the language of location, for sacred geometry, for ley lines, for the whispers in the ground, was something neither Dumbledore nor Grindelwald seemed to share. And that made him not just unique, but almost elemental. The books never state it outright, but the signs are unmistakable. Voldemort had the rare ability to awaken the sleeping magic of the earth. He did not invent the evil that lived in those places. He stirred it, channeled it, fed it with murder and fear. He knew that magic was not only cast, it was absorbed, brewed, simmered in the stone and roots of forgotten land. And he made himself part of it, an echo in the soil, a shadow on the wall, a breath of cold wind in the halls of memory. This is why his magic lingered long after his death, not because of the Horcruxes, not because of a prophecy, but because Voldemort had tapped into something primal, something old and buried. Even in peace, some places in the wizarding world carry a chill, a hush, a silence too deep to be ordinary. And when one walks those places, the cave, the forest, the tomb, they may still feel it, the presence of a man who understood the land better than it understood itself. Number 25. Crafting magical traps. Very few fans remember the true scope of Lord Voldemort's magical abilities beyond his thirst for power, his mastery of the dark arts, and his obsession with immortality. Yet the deepest layer of his genius, one left mostly unexplored in the films and only hinted at in the books, is his astonishing skill in designing magical traps. This wasn't simply a matter of booby-trapping objects. Voldemort constructed enchanted snares, so sophisticated that they served as psychological torture devices, puzzles layered with fear, dread, and death. He wasn't merely protecting his Horcruxes, he was creating mazes of mental ruin, traps that required not just magical strength, but spiritual resilience. These were not walls to keep intruders out, they were abysses meant to break their minds. In the cave where he hid the locket, once belonging to Salazar Slytherin, and later turned into a Horcrux, Voldemort didn't just place it on a shelf and slap a curse on it. He orchestrated an entire stage of torment. A blood sacrifice was required to enter. A lake of black water, cold and infinite, waited in silence. Beneath its surface, the Inferi lay dormant, lifeless, yet watching. Anyone seeking the locket would be forced to drink a potion from a basin, one so venomous that it didn't kill the body, it ravaged the soul. Dumbledore, one of the greatest wizards of the age, was reduced to begging for death after just a few gulps. The potion's magic was not elemental. It was psychological, crafted to awaken the drinker's worst fears, to make them relive pain they could neither fight nor escape. The physical horror of the Inferi that followed was only a final touch, a grotesque crescendo to a symphony of despair. This wasn't a simple defense mechanism, this was architecture, magical architecture. Voldemort anticipated not just a thief but a hero, someone brave, skilled, and desperate. He designed his traps to outwit not the average wizard, but a legend. Every layer of his trap in the cave shows a deep understanding of magical sequence and human psychology. The blood price at the entrance forces pain before reward. The potion shatters the will. The Inferi punish physical weakness. It's a trinity of suffering, as Dumbledore muttered through clenched teeth. It's the only way. Do what I say. You have to make me drink, Half-Blood Prince. Even then, he knew that the trap wasn't meant to kill instantly. It was built to destroy slowly. Voldemort's genius didn't stop at the cave. Consider the protections around Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Hidden in the Lestrange family vault at Gringotts, the cup wasn't merely placed behind a vault door. Voldemort enchanted it with Gemino and Flagrante curses, one duplicating every object touched, the other turning them into burning hot decoys. Harry, Ron, and Hermione nearly suffocated as the vault filled with multiplying, scorching copies of every artifact inside. The result wasn't just physical chaos, but claustrophobic terror. The more they moved, the more objects appeared. Each movement meant more danger, more heat, less air. It was a drowning spell made not of water but of space and fire. This wasn't protection, it was punishment, and it was brilliantly calculated. Only a wizard who understands magical escalation could have done this. The Gemino curse in its ordinary form simply duplicates. But Voldemort enhanced it, twisted it so that each new object duplicated again and again until there were thousands. The Flagranti curse didn't just make things hot, it weaponized every item in the room. To touch anything was to burn, to move was to multiply. Inaction meant doom, action meant pain. The victims of this trap were never meant to walk out. They were meant to choke on gold and ash, devoured by the illusion of treasure. Even the cursed diary, Tom Riddle's first Horcrux, was a kind of trap. Not in the physical sense, but in a far more insidious one. When Ginny Weasley began writing in it, she wasn't attacked or cursed. She was slowly possessed, her will eroded, her mind infiltrated. The diary didn't reveal its evil, it seduced her, offered comfort, attention, answers. That's the essence of a Voldemort trap. It doesn't scream, it whispers, it waits. Tom Riddle's memory grew stronger with every secret Ginny confided. He used her fears against her, manipulated her emotions, and ultimately controlled her actions. By the time she realized the danger, she was lying cold in the Chamber of Secrets, her life force almost drained. Voldemort's genius wasn't in his ability to kill. It was in his ability to trap souls. These traps reveal more than paranoia. They expose a man obsessed with total control. Voldemort didn't just want his Horcruxes hidden. He wanted to dominate anyone who dared approach them. In the Room of Requirement, he left Ravenclaw's diadem surrounded by a fiend fire-triggered environment. He didn't need to be present. His trap was alive. When Crabbe lost control of the cursed fire, it consumed everything. Fiend fire is uncontrollable by most wizards. It takes immense power and will to summon it, let alone command it. Voldemort used it not to destroy, but as a sentinel, a fire that would sleep until awakened, and then purge everything in sight. There's an elegance to this pattern. Voldemort didn't just layer his traps, he engineered them to respond to the very traits that defined his enemies: bravery, curiosity, compassion, loyalty. To seek a Horcrux meant to fall into a trap designed to punish the seeker for being good. Drink the potion in the cave, that's compassion. Burn in the vault, that's ambition. Be lured by the diary, that's trust. Voldemort didn't just hate love, he crafted his magic to exploit it. His traps were moral snares. You had to break your values to survive them. These weren't the protections of a cautious man. They were the rituals of a madman who thought like a god. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore remarks, Lord Voldemort likes to collect trophies. He would want the Horcrux to be well protected, to keep it from destruction. But this was an understatement. Voldemort wanted to make his Horcruxes not just safe, but sacred. His traps were monuments to his own genius. Even after his death, his magic would remain, living puzzles woven with silent cruelty. The danger was never over. The complexity of these enchantments implies a staggering level of magical knowledge. To maintain active curses across vast distances and different environments, caves, vaults, castles, suggest that Voldemort had reached a kind of magical omnipresence. Most wizards might cast a curse and hope it sticks. Voldemort's curses endured, they evolved, his traps adapted to the place they were bound to. In the Gringotts vault, they used space against the intruder. In the cave, they used water. In the Room of Requirement, they used fire. The elements themselves were his weapons. What's even more terrifying is that we never fully see the extent of his trap-making in action. The films touch only the surface. The books imply that there were other protections, layers hidden beneath layers. What other rooms in Hogwarts did he enchant in his youth? What forgotten corridors carry his dormant spells? Dumbledore searched the school for clues and found only whispers. The very nature of Voldemort's traps is that they hide even when visible. His time spent at Borgin and Berks taught him more than just the dark arts. It taught him the value of objects, the secrets they keep, and how to use them as vessels of doom. Every Horcrux was chosen not just for symbolic value, but for strategic opportunity. He placed them in environments that would respond violently to intrusion. His traps became natural extensions of the objects. The cup burned, the locket poisoned, the ring cursed, the diary lied, each one a reflection of the sin used to create it. Most impressive of all is how Voldemort never repeated a single trap. Each one was unique, not just in mechanics but in theme. The cave was despair, the vault was greed, the diary was innocence, the ring was legacy, the diadem was pride. Each trap was a reflection of the flaw that had birthed the Horcrux. This wasn't random cruelty, it was thematic warfare. Voldemort built each snare as a mirror of the soul fragment it housed. To destroy the Horcrux, one had to walk through the vice that created it. This mastery of magical architecture separates Voldemort from every other dark wizard in the series. Bellatrix could cast a Crucio, Lucius could plot, but only Voldemort could orchestrate an experience of agony that persisted after death. His traps were not just spells, they were philosophies. Even in fragments, his soul reached out and twisted the world around it. His magic lingered like a ghost, cursing, watching, waiting. And in every trap there was a message: you can find me, but you'll never forget me. Number 26, Parseltongue as a magical tool. In the dark corridors of Hogwarts, beneath stone walls soaked with centuries of secrets, lies a language that breathes power through whispers. Parseltongue, the tongue of serpents, is not merely a peculiar skill reserved for select bloodlines, but a forgotten branch of ancient magic. While most remember Tom Riddle for the horror he inflicted and the fear his name inspired, few acknowledge the hidden craft he mastered in silence. Voldemort did not just speak the language of snakes, he shaped it, wove it into his magic, and unlocked doors that words in Latin could never open. His use of Parseltongue surpassed communication. It became a language of invocation, command, and transformation. When Tom Riddle first discovered his gift in the orphanage, he did not treat it with the curiosity of a child. He treated it like destiny. Parseltongue gave him power over creatures others feared, but more than that, it whispered to him of secrets buried deep within the foundations of magical history. At Hogwarts, this gift became a weapon. He used it to gain entry into the Chamber of Secrets, not merely because the door responded to Parseltongue, but because the very magic that protected the chamber was written in it. Salazar Slytherin had encoded his legacy in the serpent's tongue. The language wasn't a lock, it was the spell itself. The moment Riddle opened the chamber, he stepped into magic that predated wand lore. The basilisk did not obey him through standard enchantments. It listened because its instincts responded to the ancient rhythm of Parseltongue. And Voldemort, with a mind sharpened by obsession, understood what that meant. He saw that Parseltongue was not passive. It was active magic, older than the standardized spells taught by Flitwick and McGonagall. In that forgotten chamber, echoing with hissing stone, he found not just a monster but an ideology, that the magic of language could reshape the world if spoken by the right mouth. The books hint at this. When Harry hears the voice in the walls, it is not magic in Latin, it is Parseltongue, alive and urgent. Come to me, let me rip you, let me tear you. The language echoes with hunger, but it also stirs movement. The basilisk responds to the call because the words themselves carry a magical compulsion. Voldemort learned this principle and pushed it further. He studied ancient scripts that described the rites of serpent cults in pre-Roman Britain and Egypt. He collected fragments of scrolls that spoke of rituals performed only in the serpent's tongue, used to command nature and bend bodies to the speaker's will. One fragment, recovered from the restricted section at Borgin and Berks during Riddle's summer employment, described a binding of flesh to stone, a rite that used Parseltongue to imprison a soul within a reptilian vessel. Though incomplete, Voldemort reportedly used these fragments in his experiments in bodily resurrection and Horcrux stability. He did not merely rely on dark arts, as recorded in tomes, he reinvented the rituals through language. It is said that he could hiss incantations that shattered bone and healed wounds without a wand. The language in his mouth became a force of invocation, each sibilant word reshaping the air around it. In the Department of Mysteries, among the shrouded rooms never described in detail, one door is said to open only to a precise hiss, a sound, not a spell. Rumors persist among unspeakables that Voldemort once infiltrated a portion of the department using only his voice. While no official record confirms this, the timing of his renewed strength and interest in prophecy suggests he found something in those deep vaults that Latin could not access. Parseltongue was his skeleton key, unlocking magic designed not to be shared with the uninitiated. Even the Horcruxes reflect this hidden dimension. Consider the locket of Salazar Slytherin. Its enchantments resisted destruction, and its dark presence grew near water, an element historically associated with serpents and transformation. When opened, it whispered to the holder, not only in taunts, but in tones reminiscent of hissing. This locket, heirloom of a Parselmouth, carried not just Voldemort's soul, but encoded curses bound in the same language. When Regulus Black attempted to destroy it, Creature recalls that the locket fought back. Its defense was more than magic, it was conscious, reactive, and fluent in the tongue of its creator. Nagini, too, was more than a pet. She became a vessel, a Horcrux, and a weapon, but her bond with Voldemort went beyond blood magic. She responded to his words in Parseltongue like a soldier to a general. In the Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort instructs her, it is not with simple commands, it is with lengthy, whispered phrases that Harry does not translate. This omission in the narrative suggests there were complexities in those phrases that were not meant to be understood by anyone else. Voldemort crafted them to be private invocations, spells that only he and Nagini shared. There are clues even in Voldemort's resurrection. During the graveyard ritual, the spell used is not named, the chant is ancient, and the incantation partially heard by Harry is laced with hissing sounds. Many scholars have proposed that Voldemort used a hybrid spell, combining Latin incantations with Parseltongue phrases to stabilize the grafting of bone, blood, and flesh. The ritual's success, despite the crude materials and haste, may be credited to the language used. Parseltongue, when spoken with precision, carries intent beyond what wands can channel. Dumbledore understood this danger. In The Half-Blood Prince, he tells Harry that Voldemort pushed boundaries. What he did not elaborate on is how. Dumbledore, brilliant and multilingual, could recognize the power embedded in language, but he never mastered Parseltongue. He feared it, not for its associations with Slytherin, but for the way Voldemort could wield it without restriction. No other wizard could chant spells in a tongue so ancient that even magical creatures bowed to it. That made Voldemort unpredictable, not just for his cruelty, but for the language that only he truly understood. Harry's use of Parseltongue was always reactive. He heard the basilisk, spoke to the snake at the zoo, and opened the chamber. But he never studied the language. He never wrote it, recorded it, or used it to construct magic of his own. Voldemort did. He translated texts, combined dialects from different serpent mythologies, and refined Parseltongue into an art form. In his hands, it was not just a language, it was a symphony of control. When he spoke, walls moved, doors parted, and creatures obeyed not from fear, but from instinctual compulsion. Parseltongue magic never made its way into the Hogwarts curriculum because it was incompatible with the moral framework of the school. Yet there is evidence in the school's architecture that some rooms and corridors respond to it. During the Battle of Hogwarts, when Voldemort's voice echoes through the walls, some students claim they heard it in English, others in whispers. Filch later reports that certain dungeon passages shifted slightly, mechanisms moved without spellfire. These strange events were never explained but suggest that Voldemort's voice activated dormant systems hidden in the original Slytherin design. In the broader magical world, Parseltongue remains taboo, but ancient magical communities, such as the forest tribes of Albania and certain African covens, possess oral traditions where animal languages are fused with elemental invocations. Voldemort sought out these traditions during his exile. His journey was not only about hiding and recovering, it was about learning. In Albania, he reportedly communed with serpent spirits in the marshes, using only hissed prayers passed down through generations of Parseltongues. These rites, lost to mainstream wizarding history, became part of the arsenal he later used to sustain his fragmented soul. No other dark wizard before him, neither Grindelwald nor Herpo the Foul, ever elevated a language to the level of primary magical conduit. Voldemort did. He turned Parseltongue into spellcraft, into invocation, into power. He refined his speech not just to communicate but to create. The silence of the books on this matter is not accidental. Much like the unforgivable curses, the magic Voldemort used in Parseltongue cannot be taught safely. It is magic tied not only to words but to the soul of the speaker. For Voldemort, that soul was dark, divided, and serpentine, and in every hissed syllable it spoke its true nature. Number 27. Psychological control without magic. In the shadowed corridors of fear and influence, Tom Riddle stood not merely as a sorcerer of deadly spells, but as a master manipulator of the mind. Long before he fashioned Horcruxes or whispered curses, he was already pulling invisible strings inside Hogwarts. The films gave us flashes of his cruelty and power, but they never captured the full extent of his psychological grip, a dominion that reached far deeper than any wand could reach. Even the books, rich as they are, only hint at the haunting truth. Voldemort did not need magic to control people. He used words, silence, fear, and the allure of purpose to bend others to his will. Tom Riddle's journey into psychological dominance began at the orphanage. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten openly. He asked questions with too much understanding, stared too long with eyes too knowing. Mrs. Cole, the matron, remembered him not as a troublemaker, but as a boy who could command obedience with a look. He was a funny boy, she said. He could make other children do what he wanted. Already, without any formal training in magic, he was dissecting the fears and desires of others. It was not about spells, it was about control, knowing how to make people feel seen, wanted, or utterly alone. When Riddle came to Hogwarts, he didn't become powerful because of what he learned. He became dangerous because he learned how to hide. Behind charm and politeness, he studied everyone. Slughorn remembered him as so polite, so handsome, he was so gifted. But it wasn't the gift of magic that made the young Tom so magnetic. It was the gift of mirroring back to others what they most wanted to see. He made Slughorn feel important. He made fellow students feel included. But this inclusion came with a price: loyalty, admiration, and eventually submission. He didn't demand obedience. He seduced it. The tragedy of Tom Riddle lies not in what he became, but in how many followed him without needing to be bewitched. His rise to power was lined with volunteers. Barty Crouch Jr., a brilliant, obsessive young man, was never placed under the imperious curse. He didn't need to be. Voldemort gave him purpose, a role to play in a world that had rejected him. Bellatrix Lestrange, ruthless and proud, followed him to the depths of Azkaban, not because she was tricked, but because she was enthralled. In her eyes, he was divinity incarnate. The book described her trial. The Dark Lord lives. He will rise again and come for us. He will reward us beyond any of his followers. We alone are faithful. This wasn't enchantment. This was ideological possession. The most chilling example of Voldemort's non-magical dominance is Peter Pettigrew. A coward by nature, Wormtail was not lured by glory. He was ensnared by Voldemort's ability to see weakness and to exploit it with surgical precision. Peter was never under a spell. He was under pressure, the psychological weight of rejection from friends, the terror of irrelevance, and the seductive safety of joining the winning side. He was always the least of them, Sirius once said. Voldemort didn't need to enslave him. He merely offered him a role where he would be valued, needed, even if only as a servant. The war was not won through curses alone. It was fought in whispers, in propaganda, in fear that multiplied behind closed doors. Voldemort understood the architecture of anxiety. He weaponized rumor and silence. His name, he who must not be named, became more powerful than a spell. Even Dumbledore acknowledged it. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself. By refusing to even utter his name, the wizarding world gave Voldemort more than power. They gave him myth, a monster who didn't need to be present to command. Dolores Umbridge, who never served him directly, still operated under the umbrella of fear he cast. The Ministry, paralyzed by the thought of his return, engaged in denial, censorship, and manipulation, tools Voldemort himself had perfected. His enemies began to mirror his tactics, turning against truth-tellers like Harry and Dumbledore. This was his victory, making the good doubt themselves, making institutions crumble under the weight of paranoia. The Daily Prophet, once a beacon of magical journalism, became a mouthpiece of misinformation. Not because of a curse, but because Voldemort had created a climate where truth was dangerous. Perhaps no example is as stark as Draco Malfoy's arc in the 6th book. Draco was not possessed nor cursed. He was assigned a task that tore him apart. Voldemort chose him not for his loyalty, but for his vulnerability. He knew Draco's pride, his family's legacy, and the fear that surrounded failure. He turned the boy into a soldier without lifting a wand. As Dumbledore put it, "You are not a killer." But Voldemort had forced Draco to live inside a cage of expectations and silent threats. The weight of that assignment nearly broke him. Proof that terror doesn't need to shout to destroy someone's spirit. Even Severus Snape, one of the most complicated characters in the series, was drawn into Voldemort's orbit through ideology. Snape believed in blood purity once. He was young, angry, and yearning for significance. Voldemort gave him an identity, a banner to wave. When Snape begged for Lily's life, Voldemort did not reassure him. He gave no promises, but he let Snape believe there was hope, and that was enough. The manipulation was subtle, almost elegant, and when Lily died, Voldemort had already won a deeper battle. He had created a man who hated himself so much he would walk both sides of the war to find redemption.